Look at this lead pencil. There's not a single person in the world who could make this pencil. Remarkable statement? Not at all. The wood from which it's made, for all I know, comes from a tree that was cut down in the state of Washington. To cut down that tree, it took a saw. To make the saw, it took steel. To make the steel, it took iron ore. This black center, we call it lead, but it's really graphite, compressed graphite. I'm not sure where it comes from, but I think it comes from some mines in South America. This red top up here, the eraser, bit of rubber, probably comes from Malaya, where the rubber tree isn't even native. It was imported from South America by some businessmen with the help of the British government. This brass ferrule, I haven't the slightest idea where it came from, or the yellow paint, or the paint that made the black lines, or the glue that holds it together. Literally thousands of people cooperated to make this pencil. People who don't speak the same language, who practice different religions, who might hate one another if they ever met. When you go down to the store and buy this pencil, you are in effect trading a few minutes of your time for a few seconds of the time of all those thousands of people. What brought them together and induced them to cooperate to make this pencil? There was no commissar sending out orders from some central office. It was the magic of the price system, the impersonal operation of prices that brought them together and got them to cooperate to make this pencil so that you could have it for a trifling sum. That is why the operation of the free market is so essential, not only to promote productive efficiency, but even more, to foster harmony and peace among the peoples of the world.
Milton Friedman was an American economist and a statistician who lived between July 31st, 1912 and November 16th, 2006, who also received the 1976 Nobel Memorial Prize in economic science for his research on consumption analysis, monetary history and theory, and complexity of stabilization policy. With George Stigler and others like Thomas Sowell and Walter E. Williams, Friedman was among the intellectual leaders of the Chicago School of Economics, a neoclassical school of economic thought associated with the work of the faculty at the University of Chicago that rejected Keynesianism in favor of monetarism until the mid-1970s, when it turned to a new classical macroeconomics based on the concept of rational expectations. Several students, young professors, and academics who were recruited or mentored by Mr. Friedman at Chicago went on to become leading economists, including Gary Becker, Robert Fogel, Thomas Sowell, and Robert Lucas Jr., and many, many more. Mr. Friedman promoted a macroeconomic viewpoint known as monetarism and argued that a steady small expansion of money supply was the preferred policy, as compared to rapid and unexpected changes. His ideas concerning monetary policy, taxation, privatization, and deregulation influenced the Federal Reserve's monetary policy response to the global financial crisis of 2007 to 2008. After retiring from the University of Chicago in 1977 and becoming emeritus professor in economics in 1983, Mr. Friedman was an advisor to the current president, Ronald Reagan, and also to the British Prime Minister, Margaret Thatcher. At the time, his political philosophy extolled the virtues of a free market economic system with minimal government intervention in social matters. He once stated that his role in eliminating constriction in the United States was his proudest achievement. Mr. Friedman also wrote many, many books, lectures, and also made many TV shows. So let's see much more live on YouTube. Editors, roll clip, fair use.
Yes, sir.
In a recent interview of U.S. News and World Report, Secretary of the Treasury Blumenthal blamed our current rising inflation in a large part on our foreign trade and unions. He did, however, say that the government was little to blame. Would you like to comment on that?
Yes? Unfortunately, it is one of the defects of our political system that we always put a Secretary of the Treasury and other high government officials into a position in which, when they make public statements, they are almost driven. Well, what's the word I want to use? I want to use a polite word, equivocate. Secretary Blumenthal knows as well as you and I do that inflation does not come from trade unions. That doesn't mean that trade unions aren't grasping. Of course they are. But they don't produce inflation for one simple reason. They do not own a printing press on which you can turn out green pieces of paper. The only such printing press is in Washington. I say printing press, of course, in the modern age we do it in a more sophisticated way. We use bookkeepers and accountants and computers. But it comes down to the same thing. Inflation is made in Washington because only Washington can create money. And any other attribution to other groups of inflation is wrong. Consumers don't produce it. Producers don't produce it. The trade unions don't produce it. Foreign sheiks don't produce it. Oil imports don't produce it. What produces it is too much government spending and too much government creation of money and nothing else.
After the Second World War, New York City authorities retained rent controls, supposedly to help their poorer citizens. The intentions were good. This in the Bronx was one result. By the 50s, the same authorities were taxing their citizens, including those who live in the Bronx and other devastated areas beyond the East River, to subsidize public housing. Another idea with good intentions. Yet poor people are paying for this, subsidized apartments for the well-to-do. When government at city or federal level spends our money to help us, strange things happen. The idea that government had to protect us came to be accepted during the terrible years of the Depression. Capitalism was said to have failed, and politicians were looking for a new approach. Franklin Delano Roosevelt was a candidate for the presidency. He was governor of New York State. At the governor's mansion in Albany, he met repeatedly with friends and colleagues to try to find some way out of the Depression. The problems of the day were to be solved by government action and government spending. Well, Mr. Brown wanted to keep away from this kind of thing for a very good reason. The people who get on welfare lose their human independence and feeling of dignity. They become subject to the dictates and whims of their welfare supervisor, who can tell them whether they can live here or there, whether they may put in a telephone, what they may do with their lives. They're treated like children, not like responsible adults. And they're trapped in the system. Maybe a job comes up that looks better than welfare, but they're afraid to take it, because if they lose it after a few months, it may be 6 months or 9 months before they can get back onto welfare. And as a result, this becomes a self-perpetuating cycle, rather than simply a temporary state of affairs. Things have gone even further elsewhere. This is a Hume Estate, a public housing project in Manchester, England. Well, we're 3,000 miles away from the Bronx here, but you'd never know it just by looking around. It looks as if we're at the same place. It's the same kind of flats, same kind of massive housing units, decrepit even though they were only built 7 or 8 years ago, vandalism, graffiti, the same feeling about the place of people who don't have a great deal of drive and energy because somebody else is taking care of their day-to-day needs, because the state has deprived them
of an incentive to find jobs, to become responsible people, to be the real supports of themselves and their families.
Wage and price controls have never really worked, and never can. And here to tell us why is Professor Milton Friedman of the Department of Economics of the University of Chicago.
Professor Friedman, welcome to The Advocate.
Professor Friedman, what causes inflation, and what should government do to prevent it?
Inflation is always and everywhere caused by too rapid an increase in the quantity of money compared to the output of the economy. Inflation is one of those phenomena that we have observed over and over again over the centuries. We have an enormous amount of information on it. I know of no inflation which has been caused in any other way.
Why do governments permit too rapid an increase in the supply of money?
Most of the time, it's because it's the easiest way to impose a tax on people to pay government expenses. It isn't always it isn't always a result of deficits, but most of the time, it's to help pay government expenses.
Now, if the basic cause of inflation is, as you say, a too rapid increase in the supply of money, and the Nixon administration has been following in its basic outlines the policy of reducing the rate of that expansion, and we do have, no question about it, still high prices and still relatively high unemployment. Is this delay in the consequence, in the cure, something that should be of concern to us?
Of course, it should be of concern. We'd like to have the cure work instantly, but there are no instant cures. And we know from experience that there is always a delay between the slowing down in the rate of monetary growth on the one hand and its effects on the economy. That delay is composed of two parts. The first part, which typically runs about 6 to 9 months, is between the slowing down of the rate of monetary growth and the slowing down in the physical economy, the tapering off of output. That occurred, monetary growth slowed down at the end of 1968, and about the third quarter of 69, the economy started to show the effects. The second delay is between that point and inflation. That takes another 6 to 9 months, because inflation only tapers off as it turns out that the markets aren't there to support the higher prices, the steadily growing prices. And the chart you showed a moment ago reveals that delay very well. There's been about a 12, 15 months delay between the onset of tighter money, on the one hand, and the tapering off of inflation. But inflation is now coming down, the rate of inflation, and coming down very sharply.
Hey guys, it's Jose, your regular Joe Blow, keeping an eye out and my ears open to bring you an American icon. Like Milton Friedman, I had to grow up and graduate, live life, and read many, many books to land on Milton Friedman's philosophies. So you guys don't have to. So guys, the problem is I was never taught about him and his concepts. So this is my gift to you guys. Thank you, sir. Full salute, and your legacy will keep moving our economy in America for a very, very long time. I will also practice these teachings in my affairs moving forward. Do your own research, guys. And thank you again for letting me do what I do, for letting me do my best